WPIAL championship since '07. What a move by Mauricio Ferro! The ring rattler! Oh
my! This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network. Here are your hosts, Jack Ridenauer and Sean Myers.
Welcome into another episode of the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast right here on the Westmoreland Sports Network's YouTube channel. I'm Sean Myers, joined by Jack Ridenauer. And Jack, it is a championship edition of the podcast. We've got a lot to get to. This show's going to look a little bit different. Obviously, we're winding down. It's the end of the WPIAL portion of the season. We'll look ahead a little bit to the States. We'll also have our plays of the week. But the biggest stories, the starting five takeaways, well, it's about the WPIAL championship games. We had 3 Westmoreland County teams stand alone atop their classification. And we'll begin with, I think, the biggest story of the entire weekend, regardless of Westmoreland County or not, and that is Belle Vernon area and Joe Salvino winning a WPIAL championship in his final season. This is a pretty incredible story. And when he announced the news prior to the start of the playoffs, I'm sure there's a lot of people hoping that this would be the finish. Doesn't always work out like that, but this is a pretty special culmination of an incredible career for him. And obviously for the Leopards doing something they haven't done since the 1970s.
I think what's so incredible about this win for Belle Vernon and for Coach Salvino is that it's now the 7th team, or the 7th time, I should say, in the last 8 titles won by a boys team in the WPIAL in Westmoreland County that has been coached by Coach Salvino. So that tells you right there. I mean, the guy knows how to win out of Westmoreland County, but I think in that game against North Catholic, it was clear the rebounding battle was dominated by the Leopards, and especially down the stretch, especially offensively, out-rebounding North Catholic 40-17. And when you can do that,
I've never seen a disparity between two teams that were fairly evenly skilled, right? I mean, this is not like a 1 seed versus a 16 seed.
Sure, and a championship game too, mind you. I mean, I think that's also what's so incredible is that in that biggest of stage, Belle Vernon was dominant, to say the least. I will give credit to North Catholic, though. They did make it a ball game down the stretch, but some big free throws, again, some big rebounds down the late part of the game. I think that's what was so impressive about the Leopards. They were able to kind of stave off North Catholic, but also for Belle Vernon as a program. I mean, this is a team that I feel like the last few years has been knocking at the door. They go to the title game in 2020, they lose. They go to the semis 2 straight years and lose. They lost to North Catholic in one of those semifinal games. And then they finally get over that hump and beat North Catholic and win it for Coach Salvino in his last season. Hey, I mean, if you're writing a storybook ending, Sean, to a story like that in a career for Coach Salvino, I think it was a perfect ending.
The word that comes to mind for me is culmination, because one, this is a senior-heavy group, and they've had a lot of success, but for them to finally get over the hump, and you mentioned you go back to when they started out at Belle Vernon, they had that tough loss against North Catholic by a single point in the semifinals a year after they came up short in the championship. So it felt like this was the group that was going to finally break through. And, they were able to do that. But the culmination of Joe Salvino's career, now he does have the state playoffs, but even if they were to lose in the first round, and I don't think they will, but even if that were to happen, I don't think you can ever take away the moments that were created on Thursday night by winning that championship and how emotional he was. I had a chance to interview him. I think everyone at the entire Peterson Event Center in some way, shape, or form, either congratulated him or respected and acknowledged what he did. Again, that to me was the biggest story. So it was pretty special for a team that had not won a title since 1978. And when he made the move from Monessen to Belle Vernon, I'm sure he thought, I want to bring the same championship success to this school that I had at my previous one. And now he's finally done it.
Yeah, and I think that, being able to bring that from a program that he really built to the very top, and then you take that same mold and you take it somewhere else, I think that's what's so unbelievable. And you apply it in a different classification, right? I mean, you're playing in a much larger classification as well. Plus what Belle Vernon went through to get to the championship. They played some close games in the playoffs, and they were resilient down the stretch. And I'm sure that a lot of those players knew, hey, this is Coach's last run. We can't falter down the stretch for him. I mean, this is for him. And if you're going to go out, like that, you want to go out with a bang. I think he definitely did that. But hey, I think what would be the true icing on the cake and the cherry on top, really, a state championship, which I don't think is out of the realm of possibility for Belle Vernon.
Yeah, certainly it was an incredible moment for the Leopards and for their legendary coach, Joe Salvino. Well, it was pretty incredible and legendary as well for the Greensburg Central Catholic girls. They had lost both times in the regular season against Shadyside Academy. Jack, we had the matchup at GCC. It was a very competitive game, but it was ultimately the Bulldogs who pulled away in the second half. The first meeting of the regular season was a complete blowout. So I mentioned culmination for Belle Vernon. How far the Centurions came from their first meeting to the third time around against the Bulldogs, and finally they get over the hump with the late rally, and Erica Gribble was the best player on the floor and maybe the best performance I've seen from a girls player this year. It was truly spectacular, and there's a story on the Shadyside Academy side of things. One of their best players didn't play, but that didn't make it any less sweet for GCC to go back-to-back in two separate classifications.
It's hard to beat a team a third time, Sean. And I remember even we called the game against GCC and Shadyside Academy in the second time around and mentioned, hey, this could be kind of a preview to the championship. And in that championship, it's going to be hard for the Bulldogs. And that was the case. It's tough when you've pretty much unveiled all of your secrets in two games, right? And, when you've got I don't want to say maybe some comfort if you're Shadyside Academy knowing, hey, we beat this team twice in the regular season, blew them out by just about 30 points. Maybe you kind of go in a little bit in over your head and don't realize, hey, this is still a really good team that last year won a championship. And when you've got a player like Erica Gribble, who had, 28 last year in the championship, had 31 this year, I mean, that she's going to play big in those big time moments. I mentioned it also at the beginning of their playoff run, having Avery Jones as that third option. She didn't need to be a scorer in that game, but she played 31 minutes. And being able to play 31 minutes in that championship game, that allows for Coach Skattel, I'm sure, to be a little bit more loose with some of the substitutions. He feels a little bit more comfortable with the rotation. Hey, I've got a player out here that she doesn't need to score, but she's going to get everything done and is going to do everything I ask her to do. And it's going to be a big piece to the puzzle. I mean, Jayla Peterson having 16 points was big for GCC. So a great win for the Centurions, especially with how you go back to, like you mentioned, Sean, that first meeting almost getting blown up by 30, just a true outlier game for the Centurions.
Well, I think maybe that's the best thing that could have happened for GCC in the long run.
Absolutely. And that's the thing is when you can have a loss like that so early in the year, especially early on in section play, or at least the midway point, you have a lot of time to get better. You have a lot of time to continue to develop as a team and, throw some wrinkles into your offense. I'm sure the offense and defense was maybe not where Coach Skattel wanted it to be at that point. Obviously, scoring I don't even think they scored 35 points in that
Gribble
first meeting.
had 9 points in that first meeting, Jack.
Exactly. So that tells you, hey, we've got something to kind of look at and go back and improve upon. And they were able to look back at that. And, as they say, you don't learn from a win, you learn from a loss. And I think they learned a lot from those two losses. And clearly it led to a championship.
31 points tells a lot of the story for Gribble, but she also played incredible defense. And her defensive effort, I think, in the fourth quarter was just as important as anything she did on offense. She also made a pass that was one of the most impressive passes that I have seen a high school player, boys or girls, ever make. It was one where she was driving and was running out of room on the baseline and threw a pass from the far side of the court to the near corner along the baseline in the air, kind of wrapping around a defender. It is something that, you and I watch a lot of NBA. You see high level players make that every now and then at that level of play. She did at the high school level. And I know she's not going against, 7-footers necessarily defending her, but the execution of the pass is as good as I've ever seen. She had a very, very special performance, joining her older sister, Elena, as Gribbles that have won back-to-back titles now in the WPIAL. So that's a team that they were finally able to get over the hump, knock off Shadyside Academy, and they've got their second consecutive championship in the WPIAL. Well, winning a title for the first time in a long time in the WPIAL, the Jeannette Jayhawks, and they kind of blew out the Union Scotties. But I think you go back to their quarterfinals and their semifinals, and it felt like those were the games that actually, no knock on Union, because I saw them defeat Greensburg Central Catholic, the number 1 seed. But it felt like Jeannette getting past the quarters in particular, and then the semis, those almost more or less served as de facto championships for the Jayhawks. It seemed like this was basically almost determined from the onset, the way Jeannette had that momentum heading into this game.
I think the confidence came from the win against Swickley Academy. I think that was where things really maybe there was kind of the epiphany or the aha moment by the Jayhawks saying, hey, we can beat anybody. Because you're reading the whole week how Swickley Academy's got 2 6'8" kids on the team. How is Jeannette going to handle all that height? And I think they put that all to bed. The fact that Lonnie Green, Xavier Odoricio Farrow played tremendous basketball. Noah Sunder played great basketball in the post. Those three, I think that in a way they should get a collective MVP award because of how well they played the entire playoffs. And I think they were the difference maker. You see Jace Powell and the job that Kimani Brown does and Marcus McGowan. Mind you, Marcus McGowan, I think that, he was also huge in a lot of these playoff games. But it was the post play down the stretch in the playoffs for Jeannette. And again, the fact that they beat Union by as big as they did, 63-39, the lead got up to 25 points in a championship game.
And most of the championships throughout the 3 days did come down to the wire. That was kind of an outlier. More games than not were very competitive and came down to the final possession or two. So it wasn't maybe like past years where a lot of the games were lopsided. So Jeannette winning that decisively, that was a little bit of a statement, I think.
And I think they wanted to make a statement. Hey, you know what? We've been kind of the little brother in 2A for a long time, even during the time when they were in 1A. You have GCC that takes up all of the attention. GCC's not there. You beat Ulsh on the way to the championship.
You had that call to me. That's the defining win of the season.
Right, absolutely. I think that's really where, maybe even before the Swickley Academy game, but I think just the fact that when they went up against Swickley Academy and all of the hype that there was around the Panthers and the hype literally that they had on the team, I think, and then when Jeannette is able to beat them and do it in, I think, kind of a dominating way, how they just really, they nullified anything that Swickley Academy could have done offensively. They really were able to just build on each and every single win. I could just tell when we talked to Coach Batts after every playoff game, just about, you could tell the determination was growing, but also the confidence. And I think also just the understanding of, hey, this is becoming a reality for us. This is not some, crazy thing off in the distance we're thinking of. We could truly win a championship.
And it's a pretty cool storyline for Adrian Batts and Julian Batts, because the last time they made a championship, they lost against whom? Menneson and Joe Salvino. They finished as the silver medalists in 2015. When Batts was the star player and other guys like Swade Redmond and Michael Pompey were on the team. Now they're all coaches for Adrian Batts, and they finally got to get that gold medal. So that's a decade later, a little bit of redemption for everyone involved there, and it was awfully sweet for Adrian and Julian to share that moment for Jeannette. So congrats to them winning the title for the first time since Terrell Pryor was a senior at Jeannette, and I think they're a team certainly that can make a run in the States. So between Thursday and Friday, Westmoreland County teams went 3 for 3. It rarely happens that Westmoreland County wins 3 titles, including 2 on the boys' side, but all good things had to come to an end. A heartbreaking loss on Saturday for Norwin girls against Upper St. Clair. And really what we saw was the game was decided in the final 2 minutes because Norwin came storming all the way back from a double-digit deficit. They took a lead with about 2.5 minutes left, but Upper St. Clair and Riley Calicay had an immediate response, and ultimately they just made 1 or 2 more plays down the stretch. It was much deserved for the Panthers. For Norwin, oh so close to going back-to-back. They've got nothing to be ashamed about. This was the rubber match between these teams after they split, each winning on the road during the regular season.
Upper St. Clair scoring the final 8 points of the game. That is truly... You want to talk about flipping a switch? That's flipping a switch right there. After a 9-0 run, like you said, that gave Norwin the lead late. But when you're trailing by, Norwin was down by 13 in the first half, and when you're down by that wide of a margin, you're taking a lot of energy. And I know we've talked about it before. When you have to come back and fight your way back into a game, there's a lot that goes into that. And I think that, Norwin did everything they could to keep itself in the game and to give itself a legitimate chance to win that ball game. 3 of 15 from three, though. I'm sure that is going to be a stat line that's going to haunt Norwin
And
for
the
a long
Panthers
time.
were hitting very well from behind the arc early in that game.
And that right there's the difference. Even though they were 0 of 6 from three in the first half, Norwin that is, and they come back and shoot a little bit better in the second half, it's still not enough. And when you are, again, you look at that, that's what, 12 different possessions that were all empty possessions in a less than 6-point game, less than 7-point game, less than 10-point game, whatever. That right there's your difference. That right there's your difference. So, but for Norwin, they can't be, I think, disappointed because they gave themselves every fighting chance to win that game. I know that Upper St. Clair and Norwin, they were kind of the 1-2 punch all year long in 6A. But this Knights team's going to make a deep run, I think, in the state playoffs as well. We know the job that Coach Brzezinski's done. You bring back a good bit of the players that have been on deep state tournament runs in the past. I think that this team, we're going to be talking about them a good bit for the next couple weeks.
And one of the big stories in the game was that Lexi Heller was in constant foul trouble. She looked the best offensively I had ever seen her. She was awesome on the offensive end of the floor, but just picked up too many fouls. So she was limited because of that early, fouled out late. So I think that was a big swing as well. Had she been able to stay out there, maybe they're able to kind of get over that hump. One thing that stood out, and I know you and I both did some championship games last year, Jack. You didn't have a chance to be down at the Pete this year. The teams that we follow all throughout the year, you see them and they might have a rotation of 8, 9, maybe even 10 players. You get down to the Pete, that might be a rotation of 6. I think there were 6 players for Norwin, 6 players for GCC girls. I know Belle Vernon maybe went a little bit deeper, but not much. Maybe 7, possibly 8, but that 8th was very brief. The rotations tighten up, even just the difference from a quarterfinals game or a semis to the championship. You could tell how different coaches approach it.
I remember looking at some of the box scores that our very own Dan Flickinger was tweeting about on the Westmoreland Sports Network Twitter, and looking at some of them. And, I saw a couple box scores. There was only 5 players playing, and they're playing the whole 32 minutes. That's insane. And then if you saw someone that was playing, 6 players, it was 31 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 30 minutes, 29 minutes, and then maybe 16 minutes. And there was a significant drop off. Yeah, I mean, the margin of error is great. And you want to make sure that you shrink that as much as you can. You got to go with the players that have been there for you the whole time, that have gotten you to that point. And I think that is where, that's really tested in the championship. How does your stamina play a factor? How does fatigue play a factor? And to your point, Sean, foul trouble. Somebody gets in foul trouble early. You're now having to play a player that maybe hasn't played a bunch during the tournament. Maybe they haven't.
We saw that with GCC as well, as Althoff, I think, was in foul trouble at one point. So they had to sub her out. If not, I don't know that. I think they basically just would have gone with their 5 starters the whole game, more or less.
And contrary, you look at a team like Jeannette that I feel they prepared themselves weirdly enough really well to be in a situation where, hey, we've got a smaller team, but we're going to go 8, maybe 9, maybe even 10 deep because we're going to get into foul trouble eventually. And that at times hurt them with them getting in foul trouble sometimes. Other times they were able to play out of it beautifully. I look back to the Olsh game. I don't mean to revisit the topic, but Jeannette was able to figure themselves out of foul trouble because they were so used to that. And I just think that when you have a little bit more wiggle room in your rotation, it allows for some of those mistakes that in championship games, you cannot have many of them.
Well, final topic here. We talked about the 4 teams that made the championship, but there's several other Westmoreland County teams that are still going to be playing basketball into the states. And so for those unaware, it's not just the teams that win or play in a championship, usually that move on. Just about every classification will have several more that advance. I believe 6A maybe only takes 3 teams total, but 5A, for instance, was taking 8 teams. So if you win a first round game, you're already in the state playoffs, but you do play consolation to determine what seeding you get. So for instance, you could go anywhere from 5th to 8th if you win your first game, but then lose in the quarterfinals. So some of the other teams that are in for Westmoreland County, in addition to the 4 we talked about that played in the championship, Greater Latrobe and Penn Trafford boys in 5A, Greensburg Central Catholic boys in 2A, and the Penn Trafford girls in Class 5A. Just quickly, Jack, of those teams, any in particular that jump out that you think might make a run?
I think, weirdly enough, Penn Trafford boys. I mean, they've got a little bit of this kind of underdog, if you will. They pulled off, I think, what was the biggest upset of the entire WPIAL playoffs, at least for Westmoreland County teams, beating a Baldwin team that was really good at that time. I think they could.
Seed.
And not to mention, Sean, they've got a lot of guys on that basketball team that were part of last year's baseball championship team. Okay, so they know how to win. They know how to play deep into the year. They made a deep run in the state playoffs. So this is no shock for this Penn Trafford boys team. And then I think also Penn Trafford girls, obviously. I think they can make a big run, but I think Penn Trafford boys, they'll surprise a couple teams.
All right, here's a team. Greensburg Central Catholic boys beat Jeannette twice in the regular season. They already have 2 wins over the team that won pretty convincingly in the WPIAL championship. I would imagine that they want another crack at the Jayhawks, and I think certainly they are a team that talent-wise might be as good as any in the state in Class 2A. So I think the Centurions, if they have the right mindset, and I think we saw that in the consolation, they could make a big run as well. So it's not just the 4 teams that played in the championship, but there's 4 other teams that are into the states as well. Although you don't win the championship, you're probably heading for quite a long road trip to start the postseason. I know the Norwin Knights are headed up to Altoona, whereas if they had won against Upper St. Clair, they would have been on their home floor to start the playoffs. We'll get to those matchups momentarily, but Jack, it's time for plays of the week. And this one's a little bit shorter this week, just a couple of plays, but I think a very significant one to kick things off for Jeannette, maybe the play of the year, to be honest. As Xavier Odorizio Ferro cemented his place in Jayhawks basketball lore in the semifinals against the Wickley Academy. He served up a facial, dunking on the 6'8" Mamadou Kane in the third quarter, which nearly brought the roof off at Fox Chapel area, with Jack and myself on the call.
Jayhawks trying to appear in their 5th ever WPIAL championship since 07. What a move by Odorizio Ferro! The ring rattler! Slam at Fox Chapel.
And I think there was a foul called on the end of it. We couldn't hear it because this place exploded, but Odorizio Ferro will go for an and one, and that is the play of the year for Jeannette.
Oh my! Springs in his shoes. Kane with his 4th foul. And just hear this crowd.
My goodness.
Sean, you mentioned it. Play of the year, my friend. That might have been the play of the last 2 seasons. It just, I still can't believe he got up that way and with that much spring, if you will, in his jump. Just an incredible play.
I had real doubts of how Jeannette would do against Sewickley because, much like you, I had heard all year long about the Panthers and their size. And then I saw the opening tip and Sewickley Academy won it. It was like, basically me going against a 6th grader for a tip-off. But we saw pretty quickly Jeannette was there and they were going to play and they were going to scrap even though they were outsized. To me, once that dunk happened, I knew nothing was going to stop Jeannette from winning that game. That proved it right there. One play defining an entire game. We'll continue plays of the week and wrap it up with the Seton Hill University women as the Griffins gals took care of business at home last Wednesday against Pitt Johnstown. And it was defense leading to offense in a nifty back and forth between Helene Cowan and Mia Kalich, as described by myself and Roger Downs.
Kalich with another steal, 2-on-1. Dishes off, gets it back, great ball movement, leads to a layup for Mia Kalich.
Tic-tac hoop, good for 2.
And by the way, it was Kalich on the end that finished, but it was Helene Cowan who set her up. Congrats to her, because not just setting up, but she can finish. She surpassed 1,000 points right after her twin sister Hallie got to 1,000 points. I think it was just a game apart, which is pretty cool for twins to go back-to-back and getting 1,000 points. And the Griffins are in the postseason, which we'll get to in just a moment. Well, there's no team of the week this week, Jack. I think we've covered all of the deserving teams throughout the year. We didn't want to do anyone as a duplicate. We had already done the 3 teams that won titles. So Jeannette and Belle Vernon boys, as well as the GCC girls, had been selected previously. So we'll leave that one blank until we likely come back next year for our team of the week. So lastly, we'll take a look ahead. It is the state playoffs on the horizon. Things get underway either Friday or Saturday. We'll begin on the boys' side. Friday, it is the champion Belle Vernon area Leopards at home as they welcome the Farrell Steelers to town, a former WPIAL school. Greater Latrobe makes the trek out to Exeter Township, and Penn Trafford will go to Chocolate World and play at Hershey. Saturday, Mercyhurst Prep at Jeannette, and Greensburg Central Catholic boys at McConnellsburg. On the girls' side, Friday, Cambria Heights at Greensburg Central Catholic, although that actually won't be at GCC. They'll play at Southmoreland because the Greensburg Central Catholic gym did not meet the minimum requirements for capacity. And as I mentioned, Norwin will make the trek up to Cambria County and play at Altoona area. And then Penn Trafford at Middleton on Saturday. So, Jack, we know once you get to the state playoffs, it's a lot of times you're playing teams that you know nothing about. You might not even be able to find them on a map. It creates some interesting matchups and creates a little bit of a scenario for coaches where they have to go outside of the norm. So what do you look for in the state playoffs, especially the first round, going far, far out of your normal territory for a lot of these teams?
You got to dive deep into the film. I mean, especially with how much accessibility there is to film these days, you have to take a deep dive on who you're playing. Because like you said, Sean, you don't have teams that in your area are probably ever playing these teams. If they have, maybe back in, early December. And we all know that teams change quite a bit from early December to early March. So you got to take a deep dive on who you're playing. But at the same time, stick to what you've been doing the last few weeks, the last few months, right? These players have routines. They don't want to get out of those routines. And I think keeping that routine, although not playing a routine team and maybe really a routine area, you got to keep things as normal as you can, because once you get a little bit out of your routine, a little bit out of kind of that norm, if you will, that's when things kind of start to unravel.
And by the way, I want to correct myself here. Altoona is Blair County. I should know that as a guy who went to Penn State and went through Altoona quite a bit. It is not Cambria, it is Blair County. One thing I will note, Jack, is for the teams that win championships in the WPIAL, I think this first round is always a little scary because are you still having a championship hangover, or can you turn the focus to your next goal? And again, for Belle Vernon, they can probably make a run, but by the same token, are they going to just be so happy and still kind of in that celebratory mood after winning the championship? Same for Jeannette. These players have not ever won a title. Obviously, no one at Jeannette has since 2008. For GCC, the dramatic comeback. So can the team shift the focus quickly to the next task at hand? It's not easy, certainly.
No, it's not. And I think that not only that, but you also have to factor in, some of these kids are probably thinking about nicer weather, getting closer to spring break, kind of tired of basketball, kind of getting ready.
Sports for many of them, by the way.
Exactly. And I think that's another aspect too, where they're like, hey, I kind of want to get on to the next sport. And, let's kind of keep the ball moving here. And, you got to make sure you keep people focused, because right now, I think the main priority has been accomplished, but, you don't want to lose sight. You want to win a state championship now.
Yeah, I would say that we always say WPIAL is a little different because winning that championship feels way bigger than, I don't know, let's say District 10 winning the District 10 title. For those teams, I think the state championship is clearly the biggest goal. When you compete in the WPIAL and you get to play at Heinz Field or the Peterson Event Center, those sometimes mean just as much and maybe more than a state championship. So the focus is a little bit different for this district because it is so big, because it is such a decorated WPIAL, history is incredible. So it is tough. Certainly it's a mindset thing more than anything else to see how teams fare early on in the state playoffs, I believe. Also, Jack, on the college side of things, we've got a couple of playoff games involving Westmoreland County teams. Seton Hill women, they get the number 3 seed. That means they're at home against Clary, and you and I are going to have the broadcast of that. Seton Hill men make the trek up to Gannon, both of those games on Monday. So a lot to look forward to this upcoming week, but certainly a lot to celebrate from this past week. Well, Jack, this might be our final show, depending on how things play out. It's been a very, very fun season doing this with you. Anything that comes to mind for what we saw all throughout Westmoreland County this school year for basketball?
I think that's safe to say, Sean. People need to give more credit to Westmoreland County basketball. We always talk about Allegheny County. We talk about a lot of the teams out, further west, but I think the east side of the
County
town
certainly gets a lot of love as well. Yep.
Yeah, and so I think we gotta start considering Westmoreland County, especially when I think more times than not this year, some of these Westmoreland County teams are beating up on these teams from Beaver County, from Allegheny County. So I think there should be more respect. But all in all, my friend, always a pleasure to be with you for another year, and a lot of fun games, a lot of interesting games, some down to the wire games, and then obviously some fantastic plays, and especially with the Jeannette dunk. I would say again, the Jeannette dunk of the year.
Well, it has been a lot of fun. If this is the final time, thanks so much for tuning in all throughout the year. Of course, you can go back and watch all the old episodes on our YouTube channel. You always want to stay tuned to our social media. We got a lot of great stuff on there. And check out our website, westmorelandsports.com, each and every day. We've got the County Notebook. We've got all sorts of Westmoreland alum Q&As, Recruiting Thursday, game recaps, of course, all the live and archive broadcasts as well. That'll do it for this edition and maybe for this season of the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast. For Jack Wright and our Sean Myers signing off. Thanks so much for tuning in today and all season long right here on the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast.
This is the Westmoreland on the Hardwood podcast on the Westmoreland Sports Network.